Pretty tough game yesterday against the legend Vassily Ivanchuk. Um, First off, I'll say, I mean, it was definitely like a great thrill and honor to play him. He's been one of my favorite players for so long that to sit across the board from him was pretty surreal. Um, that said, I am playing the tournament and I'm still ambitious and like as the fan, I'm happy to like just take the experience for what it is. But it wasn't a simul, I was trying to win the game or at least score. And it was a bit unfortunate because I feel like I really didn't show my best chess. But what can you do? Okay, so he didn't surprise me on move one because I was, well, basically expecting him, to play something random as he's known to do. I mean, I feel like he doesn't repeat the same line, from game to game or tournament to tournament. He's just always bouncing around. I recorded a video on Patreon where I was actually going through his games and talking about my prep and what I was kind of expecting or was going to try to prepare. And yeah, so I mainly thought he would at least stick to d4 because he seems to enjoy playing against the King's Indian, but lo and behold, he played e4. And so I stuck with my main line these days, the Taimanov Sicilian. And he actually played these moves pretty quickly. Knight c6, knight c3, queen c7, and bishop e3, the English attack. So in that video where I did my prep, I basically said I wasn't expecting him to go for the English attack because it's like such a sharp line and he's like kind of more of like a technical player and all this stuff, or at least he's been playing in sort of a technical style. And yeah, he doesn't have a ton of experience playing this against the Taimanov specifically, because this is kind of less rare versus like the Knight Orphan and Dragon. So yeah, I was a bit surprised he went for this, but that's Chucky. He's basically just always going to surprise you and come up with something interesting. So Queen D2, Knight F6, and long castles. Okay, so this is all mainline theory these days. Nowadays, Black has a choice here between, I think, just Bishop E7 as I played in the game and Bishop B4. And so yeah, here's the tough part about playing Super Jam. It's like feels like they kind of know everything. I've played both of these moves, like Bishop E7 and Bishop B4, and I'm quite fond of this one line after Bishop B4 F3. Not to play Knight E5 here, which is the main line in this position, but to play this move Knight E7. And sometimes I use this against like lower rated players if I'm trying to get like a very sharp fight right from the opening. And I think it's a great choice because objectively, it's playable. It's not like losing or anything, but it leads to very sharp and balanced positions that, it's exactly what you're looking for with Black. And sometimes when I'm surprised in the opening, again, my main line here is Bishop E7. I do like to resort to like these sidelines, so because I'm trying to avoid prep or whatever. But against Ivanchuk, it's like I remember that he's actually played this exact line with Black. And if I'm not mistaken, he defeated Carlsen here in this line in the London Candidates in 2013, the famous one where Magnus won the tournament, but he lost this game to Ivanchuk like 2 rounds before the finish, and then he lost the final game to Svidler as well. So this is what Ivanchuk played with Black to beat Carlsen in that like hugely historical game. So I was thinking like, yeah, he's probably going to know a thing or two about this line. I can't just like spring it on him and expect that he's going to be surprised. So after some thought, I decided to, just stick with my main line. This is kind of what I know best and what's considered the most solid in the position. So definitely Black can play this way. And then here he thought for a couple of minutes, and he ends up playing Bishop E2. And so, yeah, already I'm thinking like, okay, did he prepare this? I'm a Taimanov player. Did he even look at my games? It's hard to say. Bishop E2 is not the main move in this position. It's not even close. In fact, it's not really a move. The main line, as I knew, is to play F3 here, or the move F4, which is quite sharp as well. Then after F3 and F4, Black typically plays B5, And then here white has another choice. Mainly the move was g4, but king b1 is also super popular these days, and knight takes c6, which I think is Nagy's recommendation, followed by g4. And yeah, so these few ways are considered kind of the most sharpest ways or most ambitious ways for white to fight for an advantage. And in all of these lines, as I was trying to figure out during the game, like thinking about the theory and what goes where, the bishop is almost always going either to d3 or in some cases to h3 once white is pushed, like h4, g4. In some cases it goes to e2 as well, but like that's much later. And so I kind of had a feeling that this bishop e2 move, is it some deep prep or is it just some like random improvisation? I felt like the move is probably not critical because number one, more people would be playing it. And number two, yeah, it doesn't seem clear what advantage white is getting from making this move. Thinking about the game afterwards, I realized that this move is just flexible and he simply didn't want to commit his options yet. I don't have no idea if he, like prepared it with an engine or not. I think it's more of a move like, okay, it's obviously not going to be a bad move. It's probably not the most critical, but now black has to make a move, and presumably I'm on my own here, which I was. And so I think it was like a practical choice kind of against me to force me to think on my own and see how I'm going to react. And then white can decide whether he wants to play f3 or f4 based on what I do. So yeah, I started spending some time here, as you can imagine, and I really just wanted to play this move b5, and I'm really kicking myself for not doing it. I mean, this would be like the most natural and logical continuation, and typically this is how you're supposed to play when you're surprised, like with a line or you face a position you don't know. You should just try to figure out what's the most natural, logical move. What would be the move, in other lines. And if it works tactically, that's probably the move you should go for. So I was just trying to figure out, what could be white's idea. Is there any kind of danger after b5? Okay, for sure he's not threatening like bishop takes b5, right? Because the bishop just went to e2. So that would make no sense. So I was thinking, okay, if he plays like f3 here, which turns out to be kind of the best move for white, because with b5, I am threatening to play b4 and kick the knight away from defending the e4 pawn. I mean, a3 is definitely not something white wants to play in this position because it just gives black this free hook. So black probably just goes rook b8 and then b4 and is very happy. So f3 seems like it would be the move here. I mean, it's the only it's the most natural way to defend the pawn. I don't think bishop f3, knight e5, this just looks, terrible for white, losing one of the bishops. So f3 would most likely be played, and then it's as if, we have the main line with f3 here, b5, and white playing bishop e2, which again would not be a critical move in the position. King b1, g4, one of these moves are more ambitious. So, during the game, yeah, it's kind of inexcusable I didn't just play b5 because I didn't see, what white is getting from this move order, and the answer is probably nothing. I think most likely I would have seen f3 on the board, and then, well, we would just get some typical position. Probably black can play knight takes d4, bishop b7, and it's probably just a good version of this line because the bishop typically stands on d3, and I think it's placed better on d3 because it can support the e4 pawn and also defends the c2 pawn. So from white's point of view, the bishop I think is a little bit worse on e2. So yeah, after some time I ended up convincing myself not to play the best move, and I went with d6. Which I already knew was kind of wrong because there's this rule in the Taimanov that typically, we're not really playing the Scheveningen yet. One of the main points of the Taimanov is to keep the pawn on d7 so that you can play d7, d5 in one move in many positions. And so you kind of save this tempo by not playing d6 and then d5 if it becomes favorable. So usually in the Taimanov, you're trying to keep this pawn on d7 for as long as possible. Now, if you really need to put it on d6, okay, you can. It's not a problem. But it's considered, like a semi-concession. So yeah, again, I don't even remember the exact reason why I didn't want to play b5. I think it was more just like psychological rather than anything to do with chess. Yeah, which is a bit of an issue when you're playing like these super GM players. Like you definitely start seeing a lot more ghosts than you would otherwise. But okay, now I know for next time. So d6, and I was expecting f4 here. And okay, this position I think would be reasonable for black. I can take on d4 and play e5, something like this. And I think black is doing all right here. I'll follow up with b5. I'm not sure. Maybe white is also better here. I think d6 objectively is not a good move. In fact, checking the game afterwards with the engine, b5 is the only move that equalizes. Everything else, white actually gets a good position. And that makes it seem like bishop e2 is like a very tricky move, but I don't know. I mean, b5, I really should have played it. But instead of f4 after d6, he ends up going for g4. Which is a thematic idea and quite a strong move, and all of a sudden, like bishop e2 makes perfect sense, and suddenly white's position is great. I should point out that this idea doesn't work after b5, because in case of g4, white's just not in time. Black goes b4, and the e4 pawn is just hanging. So that's why white would have to play f3 first. So yeah, d6, g4. Now I realize like, okay, something is going wrong here. Like white is just getting a very quick initiative. I spent more time. I eventually decided on knight takes d4. And I figured this is kind of a typical idea in these types of positions. Now we're actually switching to more of a Najdorf structure. Maybe I'd play like bishop e6 here. And yeah, I wasn't so sure about this during the game, but I think white is definitely getting some advantage here. I should point out that this g4 pawn is hanging, but if I take it, I'm always going to be giving up the d5 square. So like bishop takes g4, knight takes g4, knight d5. Usually white is very happy to give up a pawn to get this kind of thing, because bishop b6 is coming, and yeah, black's position has a lot of weaknesses. Probably queen d7 or queen c6, and then you can even take on e7, I think, or maybe play bishop b6 or rook g1. In any case, white just has this like huge domination of the knight on d5 for just one pawn. Yeah, black is just going to have a very hard time in this type of position. Knight takes g4 is similar, just knight d5. So my idea was to maybe play b5 here, g5, b4. This is a typical idea as well. And so if the knight moves away, then I no longer have to worry about the d5 square, and I can move my knight as well. But white has this nice resource that the engine points out with knight d5. But okay, this this just leads to very, very sharp stuff. I take, white takes on f6, rook takes a2, and then he's going to take both b pawns and give his king an escape square on d2, so rook a1 check is not a problem. And according to Stockfish, white is doing quite well here, but obviously the position would be quite messy. Instead, actually, after knight takes d4, queen takes d4 was played. So I pushed e5, and then he goes queen d3. And I think it's it's kind of weird to put the queen on d3. It seems like it would be a target, but the point is nice. Now if I play b5, g5, b4, the principal line doesn't really work. You can just take on f6, I take on c3, and I'm not hitting this queen on d2, so you can happily take on e7, and he's just up a piece. So that's kind of a nice idea. He's kind of like prophylactically defending against b5 by taking with the queen and then retreating back to d3. Okay, so instead I went with bishop e6, g5, knight d7, and actually I was really expecting him to go for knight d5 here, just to force me to take and then grab the two bishops. And then here after queen takes d5 or e takes d5, I mean, white is better in both cases. Probably taking with the queen is more logical to keep the open file and to keep the outpost. So white is clearly better here. I mean, with the light squared bishop, maybe black is solid, and you know, it's not like an easy position to convert for white. But it's a big advantage. So I was kind of surprised that he didn't go for it. He just plays h4, and well, he puts pressure this way. He just kind of keeps the tension. It's quite logical. I mean, he can play knight d5 whenever he wants. So I think it's quite instructive that he just keeps all of his options open. He doesn't go for like the forcing take the two bishops as many players would do. Rather, he just keeps more pressure. probably this was a better choice because now I'm forced to spend more time as well trying to figure out what to do. Okay, I ended up playing knight c5 here. He goes back, queen d2, and then I went for queen a5. I mean, already I was feeling quite uncomfortable with the position because I think white just has a lot of advantages here in this typical like open Sicilian. Whenever I castle kingside, you know, he's just going to play like h5 and g6, and it's very dangerous. So I was trying to keep my king on e8 for as long as possible, not to kind of walk into the attack. Okay, so I play queen a5. I felt like it makes sense. At least I can try to get some counterplay, play rook c8, b5, something like this. And I do ask him a question about his a2 pawn, because king b1 is not really playable after knight takes e4. Kind of a nice trick, and if he recaptures, then it's going to be checkmate on a1. But otherwise, he's just losing a pawn, and I'm taking on c3, and so white is just immediately lost. So I'm kind of asking him to play a3, which would give me some hook. So I could play b5, maybe he goes king b1 now, and then something like rook b8. And then I'm justified playing queen a5 early because instead of putting my rook on c8, I'm instead able to put it on b8 where it would be better placed. And okay, I think white is probably still better here, but at least I have maybe some ideas with b4. Although I do have to be careful here because b4 is often just met with knight d5, and then my queen on a5 is hanging, and the pawn on b4 is pinned, and white is just going to play like a takes b4. Though probably I could take on d5 there. Maybe that's okay. So yeah, I was expecting a3, and then I thought, okay, maybe I'm getting a playable position. But then he played f3. It's just a nice move. Now it's quite instructive. Typically, this move is quite useful when black's knight is specifically standing on c5. And this knight on c5, as I somewhat knew beforehand, but really felt during the game, it doesn't stand well in these types of positions. For some reason, it's just not really attacking a whole lot if white can still put the pawn at f3. If the pawn goes to f4, then the knight is putting some pressure. But with f3, the knight feels very restricted. And so here he's just using a tactical point. If I take on a2, I think he first grabs on c5 because the move order here is kind of important. He takes on a2, queen takes a2. He doesn't have time to take here because of the checkmate, so I think he takes on c5 first. I have to play d takes c5, and then you can give this queen d7 check, and this just looks like a total disaster for black. I didn't even calculate further here because I just looked so terrible. And yeah, Stockfish confirms white is just winning there. So f3 is a strong move. He like doesn't defend his pawn, and now he can actually play king b1, without worrying about knight takes e4. Okay, so I played rook c8, and then actually here he goes a3, which I think is quite interesting because now that I've committed my rook to c8, he plays a3, and so b5. If I want to put my rook on b8, I have to kind of lose a tempo. I think he could have also played king b1. I'm not exactly sure why he didn't, but maybe he just thought he's always going to have to worry about these like bishop takes a2 tricks, that it's, you know, eventually he's just going to have to play a3 anyway, and it's not worth the hassle. So a3. Okay, here I castled, which I think was actually the right moment. So for a couple moves here, I think I did okay in terms of like playing the position. And then he goes king b1, which I figured was going to happen because now he introduces the threat of knight d5. Kind of a common tactic. If I take on d2, he takes on e7 with check, grabbing a piece, and then he can recapture the queen. But I had anticipated this, and I had prepared this move f5, which I think was the best move in the position. So I was happy I found this one. And here he actually spent some time thinking, so that that was a small consolation. So now the point is I'm going for active counterplay, but I'm also kind of stopping knight d5 because queen takes d2, knight takes e7 check. I have this move king f7, and I'm going to take the knight back. So it's not good for black. I'm just regaining my piece, but essentially we've traded into this endgame where my king is placed really well on e7, covering my weakness, and yeah, I think actually I have some decent counterplay chances here because I'm putting pressure on e4, and yeah, I don't think white is really having a serious advantage in this endgame, black is probably fine. So the other point of f5 is that it's actually very helpful for my structure, because if he doesn't take on f5, I'm going to push f4 and kind of shut him down on the king side, and then it'll be very hard for white to get anything going with his king side pawns, because whenever he goes g6, I'll just lock him up with h6, and if h6, g6. So he could take on f6 here. Then my idea was to probably take with the bishop, and the d6 pawn is poisoned because of rook f d8. And yeah, I think black's structure is slightly improved here, because now I have like the 7th rank, and I can put my rook on f7, and I think my king is going to be reasonably safe here, and my position looks quite healthy. I mean, white is still better, but at least black has decent play. So finally, he takes on f5, which I think, okay, probably a good call. I didn't spend too much time here, but I took with the bishop. So before, I should note that had he played a move like d4, this doesn't really work for him. I mean, he's taking a piece, but I'm just grabbing too many pawns, and his king is very weak. But specifically, I have queen b4 check, and I can at least force a perpetual. I think that's the best black can do here. And he doesn't have knight a2. Once I take with the bishop, though, b4 actually was very playable in this position, and he spent a lot of time here, I think like over 20 minutes, like evaluating different lines. I'm not sure what exactly he was calculating. I imagine he was considering b4, because it doesn't look like black gets enough for the piece, to be honest. So like queen takes a3, b takes c5, I have queen b3 check, and then if he goes to c1, then I'll play queen a3 check, and black gets a perpetual, but king a1 is fully playable. And now queen a3 check is met with knight a2. So I was looking at different lines here, but I really couldn't make anything work. Bishop e6, for example, he plays c4, very important move. I was thinking d takes c5, rook b1, and black just doesn't have nearly enough. Like, it's only 2 pawns for the piece, but white is just defending very easily, and my 2 bishops are not active at all, especially the dark square bishop is really bad. So that wasn't working. After queen b3 check, king a1, I can also grab this pawn, but then he simply has queen d5 check, and he forces the queens off. And this queen d5 was a very annoying resource in all these lines. So queen takes, he can take with the rook, he can also take with the knight, because he's hitting the bishop, and then next move he's going to play rook d2, or rook c1. So that wasn't working for black, so I realized I can't give this queen b3 check. And on his move, I was trying to calculate and figure this out. A natural question is, what was I expecting here? Because, am I just giving up a piece? I kind of felt like black should have something there, so I wasn't too worried about it. And this was move 20, and we were already, approaching having less time. Not time trouble exactly, but I think we were both around 30-something minutes, so it's like time trouble is looming just around the corner. So I figure maybe we had a little bit more time than that, actually, 40 minutes. I figured it looked very unclear, and my position is already suspect, so I'll just let him decide. If he wants to play b4 and go for these sharp lines, we'll go there, and hopefully I'll get some chances, and if not, then, he can spend time figuring out if it's worth going for. So it's kind of like a semi-bluff. But okay, interestingly enough, so after b4 takes, b takes c5, I was also considering this move, bishop e6, with the threat of queen b4 check, and again, forcing this perpetual. And it's actually not that easy for white to find a move here, because he can't really take on d6. But he does have one move, knight d5, that just kind of covers everything. And I don't even have a check anymore. He's starting to take on e7 and come back to d5, bishop c4, queen c3. He's fully consolidating. Okay, then during the game, I started considering a move like king h8. Because I just figured, sometimes in these types of positions, the best thing to do is just step out of the checks and then force him to make a move. Because here he can't play queen d5, that doesn't make any sense. Knight will be hanging, and if knight d5, then I have this queen b3 check, with perpetual. So this actually, this move actually makes a lot of sense, and I wasn't sure how he's going to, was going to react here. I thought maybe knight a2 was a good move, and here I couldn't figure out what to do, because Queen b3 check, king a1. I take on c2. I think he just moves the rook. It really didn't feel like enough. I'm never really threatening to take on c5 here because I just don't get anything other than the pawn. I don't get any additional play. And I just felt like queen c3 is coming, and I couldn't find what to do here. So afterwards, I checked this with an engine, and black does have like an amazing move here, d5. So actually, I should say the king h8 is already an incredible move. Like if you turn the engine on in this position, it basically says like white has a big advantage for every move except, not bishop b7, for every move except king h8. So it's always really interesting to see when these like profoundly like prophylactic moves show up in attacking positions. But after king h8, knight a2, again, black has to find the only move here, d5, which is a really strong move. So I'm just trying to play d4 and just, get everything going. Then I will take on c5. And so queen takes d5 is not possible because if queen takes c3, so his bishop is hanging, and if queen c3, then I can take on c3, play d4, and I don't win my piece back because of knight d5 hitting the bishop, but I can take on c5, and I think black is actually getting a ton of play here because now I still just have 2 pawns for the piece, but once the bishop moves, I'm going to have a target on c2, and also the knight is running very short on square, so rook fda I think is a serious threat in these positions as well. So there black is actually doing quite well. I think the engine was saying white can force a draw somehow, but I don't really remember how that happens. In any case, after a lot of thought, he ends up playing this move, h5, which to me felt like a small victory because like he didn't play what I thought was the most critical move b4. He goes for this other move, but he spent like 20 minutes doing it, so it was quite a lot of time off his clock. Okay, so here it turns out, the position is quite difficult for black. I was immediately interested in this move, knight b3, and I'm not sure what his plan was here. I would imagine it was to go for the endgame with queen to d5, and yeah, I really just couldn't figure this one out over the board. Queen takes d5. Can't take with the knight because c2 is hanging, but you can take with the rook, and then the engine was saying like b5, and I think black is kind of okay. To me it looked quite shaky just because like pawn on d6 is always weak, and I don't know what my knight on b3 is doing. It's just kind of strange. So probably white is better here, but actually it's fully playable for black. I think objectively I definitely should have gone for this. The engine also says white has this move queen e1, which makes sense just to keep the queen on the board and potentially swing it to g3. So I'm not sure, maybe this was his intention, followed by like rook d5. And then the engine was giving some crazy lines here with like d5 apparently working. So if rook takes d5, I have this nice shot, bishop takes c2 check, which is cool. King takes c2, I can take the rook, so this is not playable. And then after king a2, I play like b5, and black's pieces look so funky, but they are quite active, and now I'm threatening some potential attacking ideas and sacrifices and knight d4 and things like that. So yeah, I'm not sure what his intentions were here, but that would have led to some sharp stuff. I was really interested in this move, knight a4, because this looked quite natural to me. If he takes on a4, I can take on c2, so that doesn't look good for white. And if knight d5, again, I can take on c2. Apparently, knight d5 is actually very playable. This might have been his idea. The point being, after bishop takes c2 check, he swings the king to a1, and my queen on a5 is hanging, so I don't have time to take on d1. I have to trade queens. Rook takes d2. Now my bishop on d8 is hanging after all that, so I have to play something like bishop d8. And then white has one way for an advantage here, just a cute little trick with rook takes c2. Rook takes c2, bishop d1, and he's taking on a4. And if rook c4, I think b3 is probably good for white. That's not super clear. Like I can take on b2, and I got some pawns, but yeah, this knight on d5 is just so strong that I think this position wouldn't be that much fun for black to play. So yeah, I don't know. Actually, in the game, I thought maybe he might play knight e4, but if I thought this, then I really should have just gone for knight a4 anyway, because here I can trade queens, and I think this is not as bad of an endgame as I was thinking during the game. again, when you play these guys, it's like you assume every endgame is going to be worse and then you're going to lose it. You always think like your attacks are never going to work out. You think their attacks are super strong. It's just very difficult to play chess when you idolize your opponent and expect them to play, um, not only to play the best moves, but just to always have like something really strong in every position, which is not always the case. So after some thought, I played this move, knight e6, which I thought was logical. I mean, I'm opening up like rook takes e3 ideas. I'm putting some pressure on g5, and maybe I have some ideas of like knight d4 and this kind of weird sacrifice. So already I am kind of thinking about taking on c3 here and then maybe taking on g5, going for this like typical exchange sack. But he plays rook hg1, covering the g pawn. And here, I didn't realize it during the game, but black's position is already like very, very bad. I played rook fd8. I thought this was a natural move, and then he kind of showed me why my position is collapsing with bishop d3. This was a nice move. I mean, I already knew during the game that if white can trade these bishops, then his position is going to be very good. But somehow I just missed in this moment that it was going to happen. I think I was expecting maybe I would have bishop takes d3, queen takes d3, and something like d5 here, which if it works would be quite nice for black, but I'm pretty sure he can just take on d5, and I don't have any ideas because knight e7 check is such a huge threat, and so he's just going to consolidate next move with c4, and that's it. I just gave up a pawn for nothing. So yeah, after bishop d3, I realized like takes, and my position is just very, very bad. The knight is coming to d5, and then after bishop f8, he's going to most likely have knight f6 check. I can't go to h8 because h7 pawn will be hanging, queen takes h7, and then takes, he like opens the g file and just looks like checkmate. I mean, at least that's what I was thinking during the game. I mean, maybe I was seeing some ghosts here, but the position is really difficult. He also has ideas of playing knight d5 and then like h6. And then if g6, his knight gets to f6. And yeah, my position is just super weak on the king side. I don't have any play on the queen side. And my bishop on e7 this whole game has just been a really rotten piece, just like super passive and super restricted by this pawn. So after some thought, I realized my only chance is to just try and play rook takes c3. Like, you unbalance the position, you go and exchange down, but you cripple your opponent's pawn structure. Against some players, it makes it harder for them to play. At this level, I don't think he really minded that much. Okay, the engine points out this like move queen f5 that is apparently winning. I don't think he really considered this one. I certainly didn't. I'm not sure I understand the point. I think maybe after knight f8 it's like g6 or something, and maybe white is just giving mate. But anyway, he plays queen takes c3. I think this is the more logical move. And typically, if your opponent sacrifices this exchange, white is usually advised to go into the endgame, not to play b takes c3, where the king is just going to be exposed for no reason. So queen takes c3, we trade queens. And originally, my idea here was rook f8 to try and put pressure this way. And I felt like, black has some compensation here because white's pawns are weak. At least it's not trivial, to win this for white. And if he goes rook f1 here, then I play rook f5, and I start picking up pawns. But then I saw he's just going to play rook g3, and then after rook f5, I'm not really threatening to take on g5 because once I play bishop takes g5, the d6 pawn is going to fall. If he takes this one, my position just like immediately collapses. It doesn't matter how many pawns I win on the king side. If he takes the b7 pawn, his c pawn is just going to be very strong. And yeah, when the position opens up, because pawns are falling off the board, the rooks are always going to show their dominance over the minor pieces. So I didn't really have a ton of illusions here that I'm going to be having like real chances to save the game. I figured this was just a matter of time before white breaks through. Probably move like c4 I was expecting, and then after something like king f7, white can just like already play c5. And then as soon as I take, the rook comes into d7, and he's just breaking through. I don't know if this would have happened during the game. He was really approaching time trouble, so I doubt he would have gone for something as sharp as like c4, c5, although maybe he would. But In any case, white can also take it slow and just win the game bit by bit. So instead, I went for d5. I figure maybe this is a more dynamic choice because I'm hitting the pawn on a3, and maybe I can play like d4 and get some space. And then instead of defending the pawn, he goes rook d3, which was a nice move. So now if I take, I don't think his idea is c4 because then I can play d4 and I take on e3, but rather, pretty sure he just goes rook d1 and he's just taking the d pawn. Knight c7, he'll have bishop b6. d4 I don't have enough, he just takes. So yeah, once he picks up this pawn, the game is over. Actually, what's interesting here is like this is move 25. We have 15 moves, 26. We have 14 moves to make to the time control, and he was down to like 7 or 8 minutes here, and he spent like 3 or 4 of them playing rook d3, which is like a good move. I mean, I feel like any mortal player in this position in time trouble would just play king b2 and just like, okay, just defend the pawn and then figure out what to do next. But he spent half his time on move 26 to just try to find like the cleanest, technical knockout shot, which I thought was quite impressive. Okay, I played d4. This is the only way I can keep my d pawn defended, allowing him to trade off his weak pawns. So clearly things are not going well. And then here it's like, he takes d4, what move do you play? Your bishop is under attack, and your a3 pawn is hanging. Like, who doesn't play bishop c1 here? Right? Like, it seems like that would be the most natural move. There's no, like, rook d1, because I'll just take, and my rook is protected. But instead, he spends more time and plays rook e1. I think he spent, like, another minute here. And he's just finding, like, still, like, the best moves in the position. So now the point is if I take, he recaptures with this rook, and he's going to be winning a piece again and just up too much material. So I can't really take the bishop. I play king f7, g6 check, takes. Now if I take, he probably just takes on d4, and he's simplifying and getting to a pretty easily winning position because, yeah, his rooks are just cleaning up, and he has c3 coming. So I played king f6, and then again I was expecting like bishop c1, but he plays bishop f2, which is a lot stronger, trying to go bishop h4 check. And now this is just like completely busted. I tried rook h8. So I'm defending the h4 square, but I'm giving up the d4 pawn. And then here, okay, for sure I thought he's like down to like 1 minute or 1.5 minutes, like bishop takes d4 would happen. Just take the pawn, I play knight takes d4, rook takes d4, bishop takes a3, and the endgame should be winning for white in a number of ways, like his 2 rooks are so strong. If he gives up the g6 pawn, it's not easy for him, but he can defend it with like rook g4 or something, and like, okay, the position is winning. It's not like black has any real chances here. But after rook h8, he like starts thinking. And I'm just like wondering why he's like, what is he thinking about? And then he goes, rook takes d4. And it's like, oh darn. I mean, I really should have just resigned here because this move is so nice. But yeah, knight takes d4, bishop takes d4 check, and I lose contact with the bishop. Rook takes c7. Somehow these guys have a penchant for just finding just the cleanest, absolute, most technical moves. I ended up going bishop c5. Bishop h4 check, rook takes h4, rook takes h4, bishop f2. So I win back 1 exchange, but I'm still going to be an exchange down. And yeah, he has a choice. He can either keep the rook, or I mean, let me trade off my bishop for one of his rooks, or he can take on e6. I think he did the right call here. He just takes here first. King takes e6, rook f4. Nice move. He's just cutting off my king, and eventually he's going to go rook f7. I played b6, and he just goes a4 here, and okay, I figured finally it's probably a good time to resign. I just have 0 ideas. I can't get to his g6 pawn, and it's move 37, but, he's not gonna, like, flag in this position. Utterly ridiculous. So yeah, it's probably a good time to call it a day. So yeah, tough game. I'm still kind of upset about just, like, misplaying the opening on move 1 out of book. After bishop b2, I think, it's not that I was like giving him way too much respect or something. Like he deserves a lot of respect. Rather, I think I just lost my objectivity here, and I was just not willing to play what I felt like was the most natural and critical move. Had I done this, okay, it would have been, I think, at least a different game, because I think here Black kind of gets out of the opening with a very healthy position. In the game, once we got the structure with like e5 and bishop e6, I think this was just quite a bad version of the Najdorf. I mean, I'm not really a Najdorf player, so I wasn't sure during the game, but looking at it now, White has a lot of advantages here that they don't in the typical Najdorf. So, well, that said, okay, it was an awesome experience. I'm so happy I got to play against the legend. Definitely remember this game for a long time, and it did have some instructive moments. Like I felt like he played a very very interesting Sicilian. He just really like restricted me the whole time, and then he basically put me in a position where after 20 moves, I was already so feeling so strangled that I like had to give up an exchange for definitely not enough compensation. All right, so I'm still on 4 out of 7 now, with 3 rounds to go. I haven't checked my pairing yet because I feel like that always distracts me before I do these videos. But I think I'm gonna go and start preparing now for the next round, and I'll see you in the next videos. Take care.